Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and today I'd like to talk about our fears, both interpersonal and intrapersonal. And then even consciously becoming aware of the reasons of our fears and the purpose that they might be serving us. They might have served us in the past, or they might even be serving us today. In fact, even inquiring if they are serving a purpose today, or are they just being embodied, lived, and enacted out through our subconscious memories, both which are explicit and implicit. Also, since I personally believe that nothing about the process of life is purposeless and senseless, even fear must be serving a purpose, at least to some measures, and then even understanding that if stretched beyond that certain limit, if enacted out beyond that certain spectrum, it may well be serving and working on the laws of diminishing returns. Now, in my understanding, fear in itself does help us survive. It helps us navigate the unknown, unfiltered wild. It helps us keep ourselves and everything that we value safe, like the safe password, like the safety locker. But when it gets unconsciously overplayed from our subconscious, it might be keeping us locked in, stuck in, where we become our own prisoners in our safety lockers. Now, before we take a dive into addressing and understanding our fears and their probable roots, let's begin by taking into account that we probably, in all likelihood, are the only species that can have both an intrapersonal and interpersonal experiences of our lives, as we probably are the only species on our planet that can lay a claim to wanting to experience and explore solitude and wanting a social connection or some social connections as well. Come to think of it, is there any other naturally solitary species that gets to live a social life? Examples of those solitary species can be a dragonfly, can be a lizard, can be a cheetah, can be a tiger, can be a bear. And now think of a social species that gets to choose solitude for itself. Think of the ants, think of the bees, think of the zebras, think of all of the animals that live in a herd, in a community, as a group. Quite likely not. And maybe my understanding might be mistaken here. So if you do feel that there is any other species on this planet who gets to choose social connections and solitude when they choose to do so, please kindly let me know. So why was it necessary for me to mention that? Because like I said earlier, we are probably the only species that gets to choose a life that is interpersonal and a life that is intrapersonal as well, which enables us to develop a broad spectrum of perspectives like none other, because it also gives us a broad spectrum of choices, probably like none other. So coming back to addressing our fears, and having talked to a lot of people and having had an understanding of a few of my personal fears, let's highlight a few of them. Some that we commonly share and some that are intrapersonal, perceived by us in our own unique ways. So some of the fears that I could think of were the fear of failure, leading to fear of being shamed, ridiculed, or even abandoned by others. Fear of rejection, which is also equated to the fear of abandonment. Fear of pain on physical, mental, and emotional spectrum. Fear of taking risk, which again is both interpersonal and becomes intrapersonal as well. Fear of disappointment equates to the fear of being not able to feel and handle our hurt. Fear of disappointing others is where we at times stretch ourselves too thin to not face the shame of others' perception or judgment of us, wherein we don't want to be shamed, ridiculed, rejected, and abandoned. Fear of being labeled as an outcast. Quite naturally, an outcast means that we no longer are a part of a particular group. The group has thrown us out, has made us into an outcast, the root of which also stems from the fear of abandonment. Fear of not being seen and heard, and funnily enough, fear of being seen and heard as well. The fear of unknown can lead to one feeling stuck in the known and the familiar, which is also where the saying comes from. It's better to dance with the known devil rather than the unknown angel. Fear of public speaking or stage fright, as many would say, for the anticipated fear of being ridiculed and shamed and thereby not being accepted within a certain group or a community. Fear of voicing one's opinion and the fear of not even voicing one's opinion. Fear of not being enough, intelligent enough, smart enough, pretty enough, thin enough, handsome enough, fair enough, dark enough, tall enough, fit enough, young enough, old enough, rich enough, famous enough, liked enough. And the not enoughness can go on and on, which again can make us feel like an outcast, of not fitting in, which then reminds me of Brené Brown, the vulnerability and the shame researcher, who says that the opposite of belonging is not unbelonging or not belonging, but it's rather fitting in. So the opposite of belonging is fitting in. Metaphorically speaking, it's like trying to squeeze ourselves into a chair that's a size too small for us. It may be uncomfortable, but many a times, many people would rather disown themselves, that is their authentic selves, in order to be owned by others, quite literally and metaphorically. Which is where I believe the dichotomy of our existence as a social species comes into play. We call it my life, my choice or choices, and yet the choices of our lives are dictated by the views and perceptions of others. A life that feels bound and engaged by what others are doing around us and what others would think about us if we speak, behave and enact and live a little differently. If we even question everything or most things that many are doing and have been doing for the longest time possible. Something which was, I believe, very beautifully depicted through the movie PK, Toiletic Prem Katha, Three Idiots, Tare Zameen Par, and a few many more. Now, in my understanding, most of our fears take their root from the interpersonal connections, which with time becomes intrapersonal, and the dance of the fear between the interpersonal and the intrapersonal, between belonging and wanting to fit in, continues. And unless we take the time to inquire, to reflect on our fears, we would never know if they have been innately ours or have they been a manufactured outcome of us being a social species as well. Unless we inquire if it is the noise from the outside that has become the voice inside, we would never have the discernment between belonging and fitting in, for we would never belong to ourselves first. For true belonging requires authenticity. We also need to be mindfully aware that our identities that we identify with are also innately a part of our interpersonal connections as well as our intrapersonal connection. And many a times our identities are more focused and lean more onto our interpersonal connections rather than our intrapersonal connection. Which is why we also have the fear of rejection, of abandonment, of feeling ashamed in the eyes of others, to view ourselves through the eyes of others. And the need to fit in is far more dominant than our need to belong to our own selves first. Which is why it equally becomes more important to become mindfully aware of our fears, of the narratives that they create for us, of the purpose that they provide our lives, or the purpose of our existence, the reason and the purpose for our engagements and our disengagements. And maybe in life, if fears do have a purpose, at times taking a pause to inquire, are my fears serving any purpose for me today? Which they probably most certainly did at one point in time. If they are, then we should keep playing the same familiar, etched in our memory games, behavior patterns over and over again, even if the cost is abandoning ourselves over and over again. And if they are not serving the purpose which they did at one point in time, if they are inhibiting us, then using them as a stepping stone to gradually outgrow our fears, so that we even mindfully outgrow our own inhibited, constricted, restricted self. So let us try to look at our fears in more mindful ways to understand the purpose they serve in our lives today. Is it truly keeping us safe, or have we safely locked ourselves in? Let's reflect on that, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content that I share in the video, please consider to like, share and subscribe.